AZ-305, Designing Microsoft Azure Infrastructure Solutions Questions and Answers Set Number 3. You are planning to migrate your organization to Azure. You have many workloads to migrate to the cloud. You are considering tools that can automate the creation of the necessary Azure-based resources. Which two tools should you consider? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Option 1, Azure App Configuration. Option 2, Azure Database Migration Service. Option 3, Azure Migrate. Option 4, Azure Spring Apps. Correct answer, Azure Database Migration Service, Azure Migrate. Explanation, Azure Data Migration Service can help with database migration, and Azure Migrate can help by creating the required resources for many services. Azure Spring Apps is a service that relates to building and deploying Spring Boot apps. Azure App Configuration relates to the configuration of applications and the use of feature flags. You need to design a networking solution to optimize connectivity from the Internet to an Azure App Service web app. The solution must meet the following requirements. Cache static objects. Terminate SSL connections as close to the end user as possible. Route traffic to the lowest latency Azure region hosting the web app. What should you include in the design? Option 1, Azure Application Gateway. Option 2, Azure Front Door. Option 3, Azure Load Balancer. Option 4, Azure Traffic Manager. Correct answer, Azure Front Door. Explanation, Front Door provides all these features. Traffic Manager does not provide caching or SSL termination. Application Gateway provides SSL termination, but not close to the end user. Azure Load Balancer will not do any of this. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1. VNet1 contains two subnets named Subnet1 and Subnet2. You plan to analyze all the outbound traffic from the subscription by using a third-party solution on a network virtual appliance, NVA. You need to recommend a connectivity solution to route all the outbound traffic. What should you recommend? Option 1, Private Endpoint. Option 2, Service Endpoint. Option 3, User-Defined Route, UDR. Option 4, VPN Gateway. Correct answer, User-Defined Route, UDR. Explanation, UDR is the correct answer, as this Azure service allows you to overwrite Azure default routes and route the traffic to a solution on an NVA. A private endpoint, service endpoint, and VPN gateway are connectivity solutions that do not allow you to route traffic to an NVA. You are planning a security solution for resources in Azure. You need to recommend a solution to filter traffic between the resources in a single virtual network. Which two services should you include in the recommendation? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Option 1, a Network Security Group, NSG. Option 2, a Network Virtual Appliance, NVA. Option 3, Azure Front Door. Option 4, Azure Traffic Manager. Correct answer, a Network Security Group, NSG, a Network Virtual Appliance, NVA. Explanation, you can filter network traffic on a virtual network by using an NSG or by using an NVA. Several NVAs are available in Azure Marketplace. Front Door and Traffic Manager are primarily used to route incoming traffic. You are designing the migration plan for an Amazon RDS database named DB1. You plan to migrate DB1 to an Azure SQL managed instance. You need to recommend a solution to automate the migration by using PowerShell. The solution must meet the following requirements. Minimize the number of tools to be installed. Minimize downtime. Which migration tool should you recommend? Option 1, Azure Database Migration Service. Option 2, Bulk Copy. Option 3, Import-Export Wizard. Option 4, the Azure SQL Migration Extension for Azure Data Studio. Correct answer, Azure Database Migration Service. Explanation, Azure Database Migration Service can be automated by using PowerShell. The Azure SQL Migration Extension for Azure Data Studio requires installing software and cannot be automated with PowerShell. Bulk copy and import export wizard need downtime. You are designing a solution that uses Azure SQL databases. You need to ensure that the database solution meets the following requirements. Has 3 IOPS per DTU. Uses column store indexing. Is optimized for costs. Which service tier should you use? Option 1, Basic. Option 2, Premium. Option 3, Standard S2. Option 4, Standard S3. Correct answer, Standard S3. Explanation: Basic and Standard S2 do not provide column store indexing. Standard S3 provides column store indexing and is cheaper than Premium. You have an Azure App Service web app that writes data to an Azure SQL database. You plan to configure the database to use the Always Encrypted feature. You need to recommend a solution to ensure that the web app can write encrypted data. Which 2 actions should you include in the recommendations? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, change the connection string used by the application. Option 2, change the SSL settings for the web app. Option 3, enable transparent data encryption, TDE. Option 4, store keys in Azure Key Vault. Option 5, store keys in the certificate store. Correct answer, change the connection string used by the application. Store keys in Azure Key Vault. Explanation: you need to change the connection string to use Always Encrypted and access to the keys from a store such as Key Vault. Changing the SSL settings for the web app allows the use of SSL for in-transit encryption, but not always encrypted. You are developing a new Microsoft SQL Server application that will run in Azure. The application will use the spatial capabilities of SQL Server. You need to recommend a SQL Server deployment option for the application. The solution must minimize ongoing administration costs. What should you recommend? Option 1, Azure SQL Database. Option 2, Azure SQL Managed Instance. Option 3, SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. Correct answer, Azure SQL Database. Explanation: Azure SQL Database supports SQL Server spatial capabilities and minimizes general administrative overhead. SQL Managed Instance has higher administrative overhead than Azure SQL Database and supports spatial capabilities. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine has the highest ongoing administrative overhead. You are designing a data storage solution in Azure. The solution must meet the following requirements. Be optimized for unstructured data. Support geo-redundant storage, GRS. What should you include in the design? Option 1, Azure Data Lake Storage. Option 2, Azure SQL Database. Option 3, Azure SQL Managed Instance. Option 4, Azure Synapse Analytics. Correct answer, Azure Data Lake Storage. Explanation: Data Lake Storage is optimized for unstructured data and provides GRS. The remaining answers do not meet either requirement. You are designing a data storage solution in Azure. The solution must meet the following requirements. Provide read and write region replicas with eventual consistency. Store non-relational data. What should you include in the design? Option 1, Azure Cosmos DB. Option 2, Azure SQL Database. Option 3, Azure SQL Managed Instance. Option 4, Azure Synapse Analytics. Correct answer, Azure Cosmos DB. Explanation: Azure Cosmos DB provides read and write replicas with eventual consistency and can store non-relational data. Azure SQL Database, Azure Synapse Analytics, and SQL Managed Instance do not provide read-write replicas across regions with eventual consistency.